Hey there, welcome to the Safety Simon Says podcast. I'm your host, Safety Simon. Today I have the distinct privilege of having my very first guest on my podcast, Tanya Steele.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
I feel very special. I feel very honored at this moment.
Oh, likewise. I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I guess we should start off by giving our listeners a little bit of an introduction to yourself. So you're a former EMR turned entrepreneur. You're now a podcast host, MC, safety trainer, consultant, and utilizing your 28 years of experience, you speak to business owners, supervisors, and managers on how to train your workers, or their workers rather, and you're known as the expert in joint health and safety committee training. And
That's what they say.
that's what they say. And you're a Gen Xer, and you spent the last 3 years inventing yourself, including hosting live webinars 5 days a week during the pandemic, building a new virtual and in-person QA certification program for trainers, and turning clients' courses into online platforms and training those instructors. You have been busy.
It has been an incredible 3 years. And I say Gen Xer because, there's some of
Yeah,
us that were like, yeah, let's learn the tech, let's do it. And some of us were like, nope, retiring early. See you,
right.
bye.
Well, and technology is changing so much that if we don't stay on top of it ourselves as safety professionals or as people in general, we're going to fall so
Yeah,
far behind. So,
it's true.
yeah,
It's true.
wow. So now you've gone on to produce and host the What If One hybrid forum and your new podcast, Safety Debris. And your goal is to help raise the next generation of trainers that are fun, engaging, and impactful. I want to be that. Maybe you can help me out.
So far, so
Oh,
good.
good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Um, we didn't meet that long ago, though, did we? We were fairly
No,
new acquaintances. Do you want to share a
that's
little bit about
true.
how
Very
we
true.
met?
Yeah, it was, you know what, you're so kind because I did a presentation at the
Yeah.
CSSE, which is the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering here in the Fraser Valley. This is in British Columbia and Vancouver,
Mhm.
BC. And you were there and you had come up to me and said, I know who you are. I've heard your name for so long, and now you are in my area, and I wanted to come and meet you. And then you told me how I'm like, how did you like? It was random, like, how'd you hear my name? But you, of course, are married to this incredible, beautiful, amazing
Yeah,
woman, and that I went to church with for many years. And her dad was the pastor of our church. And so I guess when you guys connected somehow, she's like, you need to know Tanya because she knew I was in
that's
safety.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I've been, a stalker or a secret follower of yours for years. I think I connected with you on LinkedIn and I was just like watching what you were doing. That's cool stuff. And I think we even have a past with contract first aid work a long time ago, years and
Hmm.
years ago. Um, and a
Yes.
company you were involved with, I got hired on there. So, yeah, we've kind of got these serendipitous moments in the past that have kind of connected us, but it's so good to be connected with you and have another safety professional who's passionate about what they're doing interact with me
Yeah.
about this because I can talk about safety for hours, and I'm sure you can. Well, you do
I
all the
do. Yep.
time.
And you know what? It's because I love
Yeah,
it. Maybe that is a lot or for all of us because a lot of times you get into safety, either you've had an experience or don't necessarily want to be on the
hmm,
tools or you're tired of seeing workers being hurt and you really want to make a difference. So I think a lot of people in safety because they're passionate
right.
about it. And I know there's some that don't. Some people, I get that. But this is not something that I do. It's who I
Yeah,
am. And so when I talk about it, like that's just who I
right.
am. I can't necessarily separate the
Yeah,
two. And so people say, well, are you going to retire one day? Well, that probably not because it's just who I
yeah.
am and what I do. So, and if somebody wants to pay me for it, I'm thrilled because then, I can pay my mortgage, which is
All the better,
fantastic.
all the better.
all
Yeah,
the
and
better.
I do find that you hit on a really good point there, Tanya, is that, a lot of us are really passionate about it. We're doing it because we love people. And that's how I got into safety too, is I wanted to be able to help people, and support them in their time of need. And safety was the perfect avenue for me. But I know there's a lot of people who jump onto a safety committee because they were voluntold,
Yeah,
or or they,
true.
they had to become part of the safety committee, or they became the safety person, like you said, out of a need because they can't
Yeah,
be on the tools anymore, or they can't be doing the work that they originally started off with. And by golly, they've got the experience, so let's put it in a safety
yeah,
position. Um,
yeah.
what are some advantages to having somebody that's trained on that stuff, that's been in the trenches, and then putting them into that safety position?
In a safety position or on the Joint Health and Safety
Let's
Committee?
go with a safety position to start. Maybe we'll talk about the committee in a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah, I love when people are on the tools and have experienced the real work, and then they're like, okay, listen, I know what we used to do and how we did it, and now I want to help people be safe in that.
Mhm.
And so when you're trying to relate to fellow coworkers, you hear lots of time. I mean, I know not as much anymore, but for the last 20 years, you hear like, oh yeah, the safety person went for their, 2 week course or whatever, and now they've never been on a tool in their life, and they're just, pointing the OH&S regulations, like the WCB Bible,
Right.
at us, do these things, and they get really
Yeah.
frustrated because they don't believe that the safety person is empathetic or
Hmm.
compassionate or really understand the process. And so I think it's really extremely valuable to have somebody in safety who sort of understands that work process. Now, in saying that, I actually personally don't have construction, labor, carpenter. Like I don't have that
Right.
background. I'm a
Yeah.
paramedic, right? I'm a paramedic by trade, and so I was tired of scraping up, fathers and sons and
Yeah.
kids and mothers and off of the pavement, and so back in the day, people said if you had first aid, then you obviously knew safety, but we
Hmm.
didn't. In first aid class, they said, there's Wimmis, don't drink it, don't rub it in your eye.
Right.
That's about as safety related as you could get. And so I just started pouring myself into that. But what was really valuable for me as a safety professional, with no experience, is that I asked tons
Mm.
of questions. So I was not typically that safety person that would say, hey, the legislation says blah, blah, blah. I'd be like, so tell me what you're
Hmm.
doing. Like, tell me what it is. Like, teach me. And they would. And people, 99% of the time, people would say, oh, well, yeah, this is what we do. And I'm like, well, show me this. Or can you walk me through a geotech report? The first time I never seen one. I didn't know
Sure.
what it was. And so I think that's a real key for safety
Hmm.
professionals, is to really say, tell me about the job, walk me through it. Can we work this out together? And I got the legislation side, you got the practical side, and see if we can come up with a
Right.
solution. And that was
Hmm.
huge for me to grow as a safety professional.
Absolutely. And I think there's that relationship building that happens, right? That, you have to
Yeah.
be able to build a relationship with people to get the best out of them, right?
Yeah.
If you or I were to walk onto a job site and say, or, wherever, into any sort of workplace, and say, well, that's not safe and that's not safe, and fix this and fix that, and the regulations say this, they'd be like, who are you? Like, forget about it.
Not gonna work. That's
But
right.
by asking those questions, you're you're getting the best out of them, so that they feel like they can promote themselves, or they can show off to you, and that's when you're going to get that good and quality information that you need.
Yeah. And I love that you said that they get to show off to you, because they
Hmm.
do. Like, these people, these men and women who are building our cities are extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like, I've talked to some of them both. Like, we've got some pretty incredible women now in the industry. I mean, I know it's not many, but we do
Hmm.
have them. And just to listen to what they can do, I literally am in awe of them. And I love it when they get to kind of show that
Yeah.
off, and they feel proud in that moment, and they feel like I respect them and I honor them. And I
Hmm.
do.
Absolutely. I mean, people that are doing the things that I can't do. I'm not skilled to be able to, you know, do a lot of things. I'm very good behind a computer screen or or walking around and talking to people. But man, I have mad respect for the people that are out there doing the
Right.
things that I can't do. And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
seriously.
that's awesome. So I wonder if you maybe have some interesting stories from your work, because you've got a lot of history, you've got a lot of time that you've spent doing different types of industry work and exposing yourself to different types of industries. Do you have a story that you could share with us about a time where you were able to apply safety to it, whether it's a personal story or something that happened in your workplace?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I've been doing it for 27 years. So,
Just a couple of years.
one of the,
Yeah.
yeah, just a few years. And so I have lots of stories. The work ones aren't necessarily so interesting. I do have a couple of fun personal stories, which I'll mention a couple of them to you. But, as far as work is concerned, one of the reasons why I fell into safety because I was working in the film industry
Mm,
doing stunt standbys with a ambulance company, and one day WorkSafe came on set and said, "Do you know you need to have a first aid attendant at the construction of your
right.
sets?" And we were doing stunt standbys, and they're like, "Oh, but we have our paramedics here," and they're like, "Well, back in those days, well, even today to some degree, paramedics and WCB OFA are different. They're not
Right.
compatible unless you do what you can do." And I was teaching the OFA level 1, 2, 3 at the time, so I said, "Well, I can do it," because they were going to shut down the film, and so of course that propelled me into construction. And so I never thought I would be there, and just to be in the film industry as the start for
Right.
construction was
Wow.
fascinating. And just the whole creativity, like when I was on the Jumanji site, this was the Robin Williams
Okay.
one, so that's how long I've been around. But when I was on that site to see what these workers can pull off and the safety that they did, even in those early days, because we had stuntmen, we had all these things. I mean, they were on it, and I just remember going, wow. And even some of the I've talked to a couple safety professionals that did, Mission
Hmm.
Impossible, when Tom Cruise was in one of those scenes, I think, with all the level of the
Oh yeah.
cars, and he had to be, all that kind of stuff, like how they had to choreograph that with guardrails to make sure that the workers and the cameramen, like it's pretty. It's super
Yeah.
cool. And I'm not even in that industry anymore, but I just
Yeah.
loved it. I'm mostly in construction now, but speaking of the fun stories, is I have had, because we do have that similar background where, I've pretty much been in church
Hmm.
my whole life. And as a young teenager, I always said I wanted to be a missionary when I grew up, and send me to Africa. I wanted to be that
Right.
kid, and I did. And so I've had lots of opportunities in my 30s and 40s, to go to Venezuela
Mm.
when they had the flood, and we went with the medical team over there. And I remember being on one of these rivers, like this Amazon kind of
Right.
feel river where there's like piranhas in the water and there's alligators, and we're at night, no lights, with a little putt putt boat, going down this thing. And I just thought, man, and we hit this bump. We think it was a dead cow in the water, and I just remember going in my brain, okay, so what is our evacuation? Like, I can't get out into the water because there's
Right.
piranhas. You can't go to the sides because there's alligators lined up. And I was
Wow.
just going, this is not safe. And I was just like, what is our what is our exit strategy for this? And anyway, I have some fun stories like that, and I've had the privilege of going to the Congo and
Wow.
actually working with some people in Africa, building a feeding center. So I got to teach first aid to the
Hmm.
workers and do some safety stuff, and we brought some steel toe boots over
Yeah.
to them, and I got to go into the orphanages and teach the moms like first
Wow.
aid. And actually, okay, I don't know how much time we have, but I do have one
Go for
funny
it.
story. But it's more first aid related than
Okay.
safety related. But we were building this feeding center on the property where the orphanage is. I'd finished with the workers, and I just was like these beautiful moms taking care of these babies, and I'm like, oh, let's teach them some first aid. So I grabbed the workers and I grabbed the moms, and we just were just sort of out in the field, and I said, let's talk about some first aid stuff. And how do you wrap an arm? Well, we used the women's like shawls that they had on
Okay.
their head, and we turned it into a triangle
Yeah.
bandage. And we used their bed that they sleep on, which is like this thin wicker
Hmm.
kind of thing. We used their bed to splint
Oh
stuff.
wow.
And then, I mean, maybe funny to me now, maybe not funny in the moment, but I'm like, okay, so let's do CPR, and I'm teaching CPR, and I'm teaching choking, so we go through choking,
Yeah.
I do all that, and we start teaching CPR, and I'm like, so you're going to do this until the ambulance arrives. And they all stopped and looked at me, and they're like, what
Oh,
ambulance?
wow.
And I was like, oh, oh yeah, like there's nobody coming.
Wow. This is it.
Like there, this is
Yeah.
it. Like there's nobody coming. And they're like, do you mean throw them in our truck and drive 2 hours or 3 hours to the hospital? Are we supposed to do CPR for this
Right.
long? And I just remember going, oh, okay, that's not
Hmm.
going to work. I had to, because there was no
Yeah.
ambulance coming. There was no nearby hospital. There was none of
Wow.
that stuff happening. And so the next day they brought me, and it literally was a little tiny, um, like an SUV kind of, a little 4x4 metal army kind of
Right.
truck that had a metal bed in it and doesn't have an oxygen. They did have a BVM, a bag
Okay.
valve mask. But other than that, and a couple Band-Aids. And when we
Wow.
went to the hospital, I said, okay, well, what do you have? No AED, no, they just have the same
Hmm.
BVM. They give Advil. And I was just like, wow, I need to be
Right.
grateful and thankful for what we have here. But I'm like, how do I now
Hmm.
support them in with their facilities and abilities and
Right.
capabilities? And I think that's really important, even as
Hmm.
safety professionals here, is when we go somewhere to critically be able to think, okay, the work needs
Right.
to be done. Right? We need production. We love
Yeah.
production. Production
Yeah.
makes money. Production is what pays my mortgage. I'm thrilled
Yeah.
with production. And I, as a safety professional, want that to go forward. And I think sometimes we get so caught up with
Yeah.
this is our
Right.
structure. This is what WCB says that we forget that we need to step back and go, okay, this is what
Hmm.
we have. What can we effectively do and reasonably do to meet the
Yeah.
objective?
Yeah.
And I learned that on the trip to the Congo to be a better
That
safety
is
professional,
such,
be more
yeah,
flexible.
that is such an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that because it does drive home exactly that point. When you were saying that, I was thinking the exact same thing. Like, as safety professionals, we have to be creative, right? We're not always, yes, we need to have the things that are required by law and everything, but is there a creative way that we can get people to come alongside with us or that we can innovate in a way to make people safe or help them be safe or help them make a choice to be safe? Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's super important. I love that you have dedicated so much time to helping others with what you know and the knowledge that you bring to the table. And it doesn't always translate well. I remember one time I was in Guatemala, and I do speak Spanish, but there's
Yeah.
conversational Spanish and then there's like technical Spanish. And as you were talking about CPR, I remember teaching some high school students who were going into pre-med program. And I did the same thing. I was like, let's teach them, how to put on a Band-Aid and clean a wound, how to do CPR and choking. And,
Yeah.
and I said, all right, so when you're going to be doing the abdominal thrust for choking, you're going to line up. And do you think I could remember the word for belly button in Spanish? So
Of course.
embarrassing. And I was like, and I'm just pointing. I'm like, it's like here, like right here, my belly. And they got it. But
That is funny.
I was teaching them with my grandma's couch cushions. That was the chest for the CPR, and then I blew up balloons and drew eyes and a nose on them, and that was their head for their CPR, um,
Ta-da. Yep.
their CPR training module. So, so fun. But I love those opportunities to innovate, and we do. We have to do that as safety professionals
Yep.
all the time. How are we going to move
All
forward?
the
How
time.
can we make this happen? Right, and we do need that production
That's right.
still happening. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think that safety is personal too. It's sharing these stories. It it brings safety home. It brings safety to making us approachable as people. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of times safety people get a rap for being this distant, just focused on the corporate side of things. They're just trying to tell me what to do. How do you
Mhm.
how do you find yourself approaching that when people are standoffish from you as a safety person? Making it personal for them.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I very much did it differently when I was on
Hmm.
site than I do now, because my career has really kind of evolved and
Right.
changed. So I'm not on site as much, but when I am on site now, it's because they've phoned and they've said, "Come
Right.
help." So they're already open to me, which is half the battle. But I think most people even listening, I know you listeners know this, but I'm just going to reiterate it again and again. Safety is about
Hmm.
relationships. And it's sometimes it just takes a little bit of time and it takes a little bit of patience and, you know,
Hmm.
flexibility and some, a lot of, I've ran into safety professionals like, well, this is just the way that I am. I just says it as I sees
Right.
it. And I'm like, how's that working for you? Like that's not going to work for
Hmm.
everybody. And so you need to be able to know, what does this person need right
Right.
now? And I think if you as a safety person can go, okay, what do they need? And can I meet that
Right.
need? And so for me as a consultant, when people are like, okay, Tanya, I got the safety stuff. I have to do it. I now have to bid on this project. Somebody's asked me for a safety manual. I've never had one. My one page used to work.
Right.
It's now not working and they're frustrated. And I'll just try to make safety simple. And so I'll just, bring it down and I'll say, okay, this is all you have to do is these two or
Hmm.
three things because I know that they're
Right.
overwhelmed. And so for me to meet their need is to make it
Hmm.
simple. And in that moment, if I can do that and meet one of their needs, they're just like, you could just see their whole body
Right.
changes. Hey, and I know, depending if you're watching this or listening to it or watching it on YouTube when you post it later, but when the body just kind of the shoulders
Yeah.
drop and they sit back and they're like this breath,
Hmm.
they're like, oh, that's it. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's it. And then we just get them through those first little kind of bumps and steps. And then they're just
Hmm.
open now for all the stuff that I'm going to throw at them later because it's not three easy
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah.
And
But but you bring
but
up a
yeah.
good point, and phrase that comes to mind is change management, and it's something that as safety people we have to do. Change management, and for our listeners
That's
who
right.
may not be aware of what change management is, it's basically how we get people from step A to step C. What are the steps that we have to
Mhm.
take to get somebody to that transformational change so that they're able to see, okay, yeah, these are the steps that I have taken or that I can take to get to that next step, right? If you get in your car, you don't magically appear at your destination. There's a pit stop along the way. There's a lunch break somewhere in there, and you may even have to fill up with gas. And so those steps that we take as safety people, uh, it's important. And we need to have a plan of how we are going to get people on side with us through that relationship building and through the conversations that we have. But change management, it's always been that fascinates me, and it's something that if we are doing it well, we're going to have so much more
Mhm.
success as a safety person, bringing people alongside with us and being willing to do the change. Have you found that's the
Yeah,
same for you?
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
I
Yeah,
I
100%.
remember one facility that I worked at. They had this area where there was no fall protection, and they definitely needed fall protection. And the people that worked in that area, very comfortable around it. They were like, "Oh yeah, it's no big deal." I was like, "But there's a harness right there. Why don't you use it?" "Oh no, we don't need that. It's too much of a pain." "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And I, through the course of things, I talked to the maintenance people, I talked to the people that worked in that area, talked to management. And we ended up getting a solution in place. And when we got it in place, I worked really closely, particularly with one maintenance person, and they did not like me. They didn't like me as a person. They didn't like what I was doing. They thought it was a pain in the
Yep.
butt.
I get it.
And
Yep.
after I got the machine or the fall protection guarding in place, it was a whole system. Um, the next day I went out there and he was there tinkering with it. And I'm like, oh man, he's totally like messing it up. He's
Gonna take
bypassing
it
the
down,
safeties.
take it apart.
But he wasn't.
Yeah.
He said somebody bumped it with the forklift last night and I'm fixing it. I thought, well, that's interesting. And
That is
yeah.
interesting.
And I was like, okay. And then the next day, I walked out. He was tinkering with it again. And again, I'm still like, oh, maybe first time's the charm and who knows what's happening.
Hmm.
No, every day he was out there and just making it that 1% better every single time. And because of all the conversations that I had had with him, he now was on my side, and he took
Nice.
that ownership of that piece of equipment on, and he was like, this is my baby, and I'm going to make sure that it
Mhm.
is successful. And that piece of equipment is still up to this day. So it's so interesting to see that. And as safety professionals, it's challenging. It feels like we're
Yeah.
pulling teeth. We're really just, come on, let's come with me. I can see the path so clearly, and yet the people around
Mhm.
us can't. But the more that we're able to, provide those steps, like you said, the A, B, C, or the 1, 2, 3, and just break it down. These are the three things you need to do. It helps bring them alongside, because then it's achievable and it's something that they can tackle and they can feel successful at.
Yeah. Yeah, I agreed.
Yeah.
I agreed. And I love that you've had those conversations. And I wish more people would. Even recently, I was at a site where a construction safety officer, so CSO, was really frustrated with the workers because they weren't doing their pre-trip inspection on their
Okay.
forklift. And she called me in and she says, Tanya, I'm so frustrated. And I'm like, well, what have you done? What's the scoop? She goes, well, I've yelled at them. I've been nice to them. I've been sweet to them. I've disciplined them. And she's like, I've tried everything, all that I have to try to motivate the
Right.
change. And I said, okay, well, have you asked them why they don't fill it
Mm.
out? Dead silence. And I'm like, let's go and talk.
Yeah.
So there was outside a gentleman working with a forklift, and I introduced myself, told him I was with the third party, and I said we are just kind of going through it and noticing that these pre-trips sometimes being filled out, sometimes not. Like, can you give me some thoughts about it? Like, why don't you fill it out, or what don't you like about it? Like, what do you like about it? He says, well, it's great that we have no issue with it, but the spaces were so
Mm.
tiny when they wrote in it, they couldn't really see the wording. And if they wrote on every line, it would write over top. And so then they would only write a few things that were the most
Mm.
important things because it was too crowded. And I said, okay, so if we made the boxes bigger, would you write in it? Oh, bigger boxes would be great. And I'm
Interesting.
like, okay, like something so
Right.
simple. Ask questions, ask questions, ask
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. I love that.
Have the
I
conversation.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to have that conversation and to ask those questions. It's
Yeah.
life giving.